Alan Dershowitz, my friend, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
It has been a really confusing week. I'm losing friends, I think, because I stand with Israel's right to defend themselves, and I'm pointing out that while I don't want a war, Iran is a really bad place. And then I see the Supreme Court comes out, and there are three justices who are like, I don't know. I think children, can change their identity before we even let them drive or carry a gun or enlist in the military. It's insane.
It is insane, especially since, the radical left says that a 17-and-a-half-year-old can't consent to have voluntary sex with their boyfriend. That would be sexist and that would be horrible. But they can consent to have an abortion and they can consent to have radical surgery that can't be reversed. By the way, the decision is like 6-2.5. Elena Kagan, my former colleague at Harvard, didn't reach the merits of whether or not a state could actually ban these operations on a minor. She got involved in whether or not you need super duper scrutiny or just super scrutiny, a kind of, a very technical thing, but she didn't rule on whether under any kind of scrutiny the state could do that. So definitely two of them said that the state could do it, but not necessarily a third one.
Okay. Can you break this argument down and
Sure.
why it should have been unanimous?
Oh, it should have been unanimous. There's no question. States under the Constitution have the authority to decide medical issues. States decide a whole range of medical issues. I remember when I was a young professor, there was an issue of whether or not one twin could be operated on to remove a kidney to be given to another twin. And, that case went all the way through the courts. The federal government never got involved in that. That was up to the state of Massachusetts. And, they made an interesting decision. Some states go the other way. Half the countries of Europe go one way on this, half the countries of Europe go the other way. And Justice Brandeis once said that states are the laboratories of constitutional experimentation. Mm-hmm. They have the right to do things their own way, and then we'll see over time. Over time, I predict that we will find that this kind of surgery is not acceptable scientifically for young people. The New York Times had an absurd op-ed yesterday by the mother of a transgender person, and it never mentioned, you do the arithmetic, that the person was now 18 years old, and the decision doesn't apply to anyone who's 18. If you're, just wait. Don't make irreversible decisions when you're 12 years old or 13 years old, because we know the statistics show that some people at least regret having made these irreversible surgical decisions, particularly. Yeah.
So why is it just that the state? Why wasn't the argument you can't do this to children?
Well, that's the question. Whether or not, if a state says you can do it to children, that violates the Constitution. I think states are given an enormous amount of leeway in deciding what's best for people. You leave it to the public. And, for me, if I were, voting, I would not vote to allow a 17-year-old to make that irreversible decision. But if a state wants to do it, and if a country in Europe wants to do it, all right. But the idea that there's a constitutional right for a minor who can't, isn't old enough to consent to a contract or to have sex, is old enough to consent to do something that will change their life forever and they will come to regret is absurd.
So I don't know how you feel about Justice Thomas, but he took on the so-called experts and really kind of took them to the woodshed. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I agree with that. I've devoted my whole life to challenging experts. That's what I do in court. I challenge experts all the time. Most of the major cases that I've won have been cases where the experts went one way, and we were persuading them that persuaded a jury or a judge that the expert is not really an expert. Experts have become partisans, just like everybody else. And so I'm glad that expertise is being challenged by judges. And, experts ought to challenge judges, judges challenge experts. That's the world we live in. Everybody challenges everybody else. As long as we're all of us allowed to speak, allowed to have our point of view expressed, allowed to vote, that's democracy. Democracy doesn't require a singular answer to complex medical, psychological, moral problems. We can have multiple answers. We're not a dictatorship. We're not North Korea or Iran, where the Ayatollah or the leader tells us what to think. We can think for ourselves, and we can act for ourselves within limits.
It's really interesting because this is my argument with Obamacare. I was dead set against Obamacare, but I wasn't against Romney Care when it was in Massachusetts. If that's what Massachusetts wants to do, Massachusetts can do it. Try it.
Yeah.
And honestly, if it would work in a state, we would all adopt it. But the problem is, in some of these things, like Romney Care, doesn't work, and so they want to rope the federal government into it because the federal government can just print money. And any state wants to do anything. But I for instance, I have a real hard time with California right now because I have a feeling, when they fail, we're going to be roped into paying for the things that we all knew were bad ideas. Why should I pay for it in Texas when I know that wouldn't work? And I've always wanted to live in California, but I don't because I know that's not going to work.
Yeah, but, conservatives sometimes take the opposite point of view. Take guns, for example. The same Justice Thomas says that a state cannot have the authority to decide that guns should not be available in Times Square or in schools, that there has to be a national openness to guns because of the Second Amendment. And, you can argue reasonably what the Second Amendment means, but many conservatives take the view that there has to be a single standard for guns, and states can't vary in their decisions how to control guns. I'm in favor of letting the states make those decisions. Yeah.
Doesn't that just take what the Bill of Rights is about and turns it upside the head? I mean, it says, anything not mentioned here, the states have the rights, but they cannot, the federal government cannot get involved in any of these things, and these are rights that are enshrined. So, I mean, because you could say that, but when it comes to health care, that's not in the Constitution, not in the Bill of Rights.
There's a big difference, of course. The Second Amendment does provide for the right to bear arms. The question is whether it's interpreted in light of the beginning of the Second Amendment, which says essentially a well-regulated militia, whether that applies to private ownership as well, whether it can be well-regulated by states. Look, these are interesting debates, and the Supreme Court, decides these. But all I'm saying is that many of these decisions are in some way influenced by ideology. The words of the Constitution don't speak like, the Ten Commandments and God giving orders from on high. They're often written in ambiguous terms. Even the Ten Commandments, it says, thou shalt not murder. And it's been interpreted by some to say, thou shalt not kill. The Hebrew is lo tirtzach. Tirtzach is the Hebrew word for murder, not kill. And, of course, we know that in parts of the Bible, you are allowed to kill your enemies. If they come after you to kill you, rise up and kill them first. So, human beings are incapable of writing with absolute clarity about complex issues. That's why we need institutions to interpret them. But the institution should be fair, and the Supreme Court sometimes has taken over too much authority and too much power. I have an article today on Gatestone, which starts with a quote from the Book of Ruth, and it says, when judges ruled the land, there was famine. And I say, judges were not supposed to ever rule. Going back to biblical times, judges are supposed to judge. People who are elected or appointed appropriately are the ones who are supposed to rule.
Quickly, two other topics, and I know you have to go.
Sure.
So if I can get a couple of quick takes on you.
Sure.
The Democrats that are being handcuffed and throwing themselves into situations, do you find that to be a sign of a fascistic state or a publicity stunt?
It's, of course, it's a publicity stunt. And they would admit it, give them a drink at 11 o'clock at night in the bar, and they'll tell you that they're doing this deliberately to get attention. Of course, a guy who was running behind in the mayor race in New York goes and gets himself arrested, and now he's on every New York television station, probably will move himself up in the polls. So no, I don't believe in that, and I don't believe we should take it seriously.
Last question. I am proudly for Israel, but I'm also for America, and I am really tired of foreign wars. And I think you can be pro-Israel and pro-America at the same time. I don't think that you can. You don't have to say I'm for Israel defending themselves, and then that makes me a warmonger. I am also very concerned about Iran, and have been for a very long time, because they're twelvers. They're Shia twelvers that want to wash the world in blood to hasten the return of the promised one. And so when they have a nuclear weapon, it's a whole different story.
No, I agree with you, and I think Tucker Carlson is absolutely wrong when he says you have to choose between being America first or supporting Israel. Supporting Israel in this fight against Iran is being America first, is supporting America. Israel has been doing all the hard work. It's been the one who's lost its civilians and, fortunately, none of its pilots yet. But America and Israel work together for the interests of both countries. So I'm a big supporter of the United States, a patriot, and I'm a big supporter of Israel at the same time, because they work together in tandem to bring about Western values.
Should we drop a bomb?
Yes.
Should our plane drop the bomb?
Yes, we should, and without killing civilians, it can be done. Probably needs 4 bombs, not 1 bomb. First, 1 bomb to open up the mountain, then another bomb to destroy what's going on inside. And in my book, The Preventive State, I make the case for when preventive war is acceptable. And the war against Iran is as acceptable as it would have been to attack Nazi Germany in the 1930s. If we had done that, if Britain and France had attacked Nazi Germany in the 1930s instead of allowing it to be built up, it could have saved 60 million lives. And so sometimes you have to take preventive actions to save lives.
When is the preventative state out, Alan?
Oh, just now, and it's
just now.
Done very well on Amazon. New York Times refuses to review it because I defended Donald Trump, and the Harvard Club canceled my appearance talking about the book because I haven't been defending Harvard. I have been defending President Trump's attack. By the way, I have a new book coming out soon called "Trump to Harvard: Go Fund Yourself."
Okay, well, let's stay on this one. I'd love to have you on back next week to talk about the preventative state, if you will.
Of course.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law School professor emeritus, host of The Dersh Show, and the author of the new book. It's out now, The Preventative State. I think that is a really important topic because we are traveling down the roads where fascism, on both sides, where fascism can start to creep in. And it's all for your own good and all for your own protection. Beware.